how to do it that is practical, because we've got some people who've done that themselves, and we've got some people who can point you in the direction of really good resources, but mostly that it's achievable, because doing really great best practice well-being doesn't mean that you need to have huge teams of people or panels of experts. Fortunately, good people have done this ahead of you, and that information is readily available in the right places online and with the right people, if you can pull them into your organisation without too much trouble. So to start off with, this is Jim from SafeWork. Do you want to just say a little bit of background about yourself?
Thanks, Jay, and thank you everyone for coming today. It's a really great initiative for Uprise to call this panel together and for the live stream and for everyone to get the message out. So I'm Jim Kelley. I'm with the Director for Health and Return to Work at SafeWork New South Wales. We're the Work Health and Safety Regulator. We're fairly well known for our regulatory functions in the physical health and wellbeing space, but not so much in the psychological health and wellbeing space, and really here to share some of that with you today. My portfolio includes mental health and both our regulatory function, but also our advice and awareness function, as well as some other areas like ergonomics, return to work, and the work environment.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Kim Cheney. I'm the head of HR for PayPal Australia. PayPal, if you do any kind of online shopping, you will be familiar with, is an online payment system. And so my role is kind of end-to-end HR for the business. And again, I thank Jay for this opportunity. We've done some really great things with wellness and wellbeing, and it's an honour to be able to come and share the learnings with you all. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Shannon. I'm a workplace mental health and wellbeing consultant, formerly of BlackDog Institute. So I've spent the last few years working with clients, corporate, government, not-for-profit, looking at what they're doing in terms of employee mental health and wellbeing, and matching that against what the evidence says around is best practice in that area and making recommendations based on that.
Hi everyone, I'm Breckon Jones. I'm the Head of Talent Insights and Solutions, which is a fancy way of saying that I look after performance, pay, benefits and workforce analytics at Deloitte Australia. And my interest in mental health has been long and varied. And before I worked for Deloitte, I was the Global Head of Employee Wellbeing for American Express and launched Amex's Global Wellbeing Program in 50 countries. And that was a fantastic experience for me that I've tried to carry through. That's a very big company, but I guess one of the things that I'm keen to talk about today is how we can apply those practices in mental health in the workplace for big organisations to small and medium-sized enterprise as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all being here. So I'm just going to start with a bit of an overview to give you a map of the territory. So Jim, do you want to just give us a bit of a picture about what are legal and moral obligations that companies have when it comes to wellbeing and mental health for the organisation?
Yeah, sure, Joe. Why we're here. Anyone who runs a business, a person conducting a business or an undertaking, has to take all reasonable practical steps to ensure the health and safety of their workers. We know that fairly well in terms of physical hazards or hazards that lead to fatalities, but our psychological health is one of the challenging areas that's not prescribed necessarily in the legislation, but it's inferred in terms of the risk management responsibilities, which makes it quite challenging. But we do have a legal obligation to make sure we provide a safe and healthy workplace. We do know the workplace can have both a positive and a negative impact on your psychological health. So we do need to take action and proactive action to make sure it has a positive influence wherever possible. There's obviously the moral and ethical argument for why you should be focused on mental health as well. As many as 1 in 6 people in the workplace are suffering from mental health at any given time. They're probably not talking to you about it. They're not telling you about that because of the stigma associated with mental health. We also know that as many as 50% of us will experience mental illness at some stage in our lives. So if it doesn't affect us personally, it'll affect someone very close to us. So there's a really good, strong moral and ethical reason for why we should try and create a safe workplace wherever possible.
Yeah, I think if it's 1 in 2, right, it's basically that's the very definition of normal. So it means we really need to start shifting this conversation away from this being seen as an illness that has stigma behind it just towards something that is about recognising that this is part of our human experience. I think there's also, more and more information that's coming out around what the returns are, what the commercial opportunities are as you start to see businesses investing into wellbeing and mental health? Do you have any sense about, even at this early stage, what's happening around the commercial opportunity?
Yeah, certainly. So we've got the legal obligation, we've got the moral and ethical obligation, but we also know it's good for business. We know from our own research that we've made available on our website, so mentalhealth@work.nsw.gov.au. We make all our research available for those that didn't tap into. We've done some return on investment analysis that indicate, on average, a 4-to-1 return for any investment in the mental health space, as much as 10-to-1 depending on the initiative that you introduce, and detail is in that research that's available online. So we know that there's good commercial drivers for it, but we also know that everyone has good and bad days at work. Some of us have to take time off work for those bad days, but others come to work and are present, but not necessarily productive. So a mentally healthy workplace is really about making us all perform at our best more often. So creating an environment where we are performing as healthy and as safely as possible, but also as productively as possible, which is good for business.
Yeah, I think conversation has been shifting, and that's partly to do with SafeWork. I've heard kind of the term psychological safety really start to become much more prominent, even from the time when we first started our startup, which is 2016, where I had never heard of psychological safety. Now I'm coming in and talking to people and hearing them say, okay, we need to do something about psychological safety. How do we do it? Which is probably where I'll bring Shannon in on this one. So tell me, like, when you're talking to mostly you're talking to HR managers of all different sizes of business. Like, what are you trying to help them to understand when they're sitting there nervous? Like, how do I do wellbeing strategy? What does that actually involve? How do you paint the picture for them at the start?
I guess why I'm passionate about this is because we're in a space at the moment where there's all of this emerging research, and there's some very simple things that people can do. And conversations around mental health and mental illness historically have scared people, they intimidate people, and so I haven't spoken to a client in the last 5 years who hasn't said to me that they have some nervousness around that, and so that is where we start. And part of alleviating that nervousness is in explaining to people that there is really good research and really good, very simple strategies that people can be using to increase health and wellbeing of their employees and look at this mental health space. So we're starting, I guess, with the research. I think historically people have had, when I started a few years ago, and coming back to what you were saying a little bit, that things have shifted, that people were talking about, I'd have a conversation with a client and they'd say, we don't want to talk about mental illness, can we just talk about wellbeing? We don't want to use those words. And so that's sort of indicative of a massive shift that we've seen even in the last 5 years, that we've gone from only wanting to talk about wellbeing to there being much greater mental health literacy and people knowing that they need to be talking about psychological safety. So. Yeah.
Why do you think that, what do you see the reasons are that are the kind of key drivers of why they should be thinking about a mental health strategy that goes beyond Are You OK Day?
I think it helps us to, we have come from, in the last few years, people having disparate interventions, so that maybe they're starting with manager training, maybe they're starting with Are You OK Day, and those things have a place. But one of the big questions we get from clients is around how they sustain messaging, how you make this part of the day-to-day, and that really, depending on the size of the business, it's always a long game, and depending on the size of the business can be a couple of years. And so I think really having a strategy and being considered does a couple of things. So it means that you can consider mental health and wellbeing across the spectrum. So we're not just thinking about working with employees who are experiencing mental illness. We're putting things in place that means that they're less likely to become unwell, or that they're more likely to seek help and be open about their experience if they are having a hard time. And so having a strategy, I think, allows us to be considered in working across the spectrum. It allows us to sustain that messaging and to be robust and to think at different interventions that we could put in place at all different levels of a business and across a business. And it also helps you stay in your lane. I think alongside all of this research that's emerging and people realising they need to do something about employee mental health and wellbeing, is a lot of providers popping up in the space and being very proactive in approaching employers, and it's really important for employers to engage in things that have really strong evidence behind them. And so I think having a strategy and being considered in your approach and having a framework around which you're approaching mental health that you've been decided helps you to stay in your lane and stay stay on track with that and put interventions in place that are meaningful.
Yeah, so I suppose now to talk a bit about like how to actually do it. Kim's company PayPal is one of our customers. We have the benefit of being able to see all of Kim's employee engagement data, and I hope I'm not putting her on the spot too much to say her engagement scores are incredibly high. So the reason why I wanted to bring her in today is just to say, like, how did you get your engagement scores to be that high? Because what I've seen you do is put together a strategy ahead of a lot of other companies. Like, you started doing this when we first started talking. You had like, okay, here's my year, this is what it looks like. I've pulled together all of these different things. How did you think it up? How did you get it started? How did you implement it?
Yeah, it's honestly been quite a journey, and it has grown as I've tested and learnt as time goes on. And so I was very fortunate to meet Jay a couple of years ago when he was just starting up Uprise, and I think for both of us it was quite a process of understanding. I knew I needed something, but I wasn't quite sure what that was, and I wasn't ready to pull together a full strategy because I just didn't quite know. And you know, we're thinking the numbers of 1 in 6 and the make it meaningful, and so it was kind of overwhelming to think, I'm just not quite sure what actually I need to do. And so meeting you was quite fortunate because we were able to sort of launch with something that we could get out into the business and people could try. And what the beauty of the Uprise program is we could market it and people knew it was there, but it wasn't, it was easy for them to use without feeling like overwhelmed by using it. So it was a really nice start for us. PayPal globally have a value of wellness, which I'm quite sure is not unique to us. Most companies have company values. I'm quite sure there's something around wellness and wellbeing in a majority of them. So globally, I have a really good footprint to start with, kind of having the ability to use that to draw from to say, hey, this is important and we need to do something in this space. And I'm really lucky that globally there's a real energy around wellness. So kind of half the battle's already won. So what I did was I went out to the business, I asked people, I listened, I read through the engagement feedback, I talked to people, you know, I watched people's interactions, talking to Jay, talking to other people in the community, in the business community that are specialists in this space and thinking about what they'd done. And I just had all of these ideas that I wanted to do, and it was just almost overwhelming, and there was just too much to do. And I think to your point, Shannon, it's kind of, what are those things that are going to be really meaningful to the business? What do they want? How can we best help them even just to get started? We rolled out a program about 2 years ago that was called 100% You. And 100% You initially started as our focus for career development and learning. And the beauty of it was this year I pivoted and made it 100% You Wellness. And so the entire program of activity for the year was focused solely on wellness and wellbeing, and a big focus on mental health. And we partnered with a number of external providers to help us bring that to life, and one of them was BlackDog. And we felt that what we really wanted to hone in on was giving people tools to open conversations in the workplace and feel comfortable about talking about it in the workplace, and just really opening it up as an issue that shouldn't be shoved in a corner, it shouldn't be ignored, but actually it's really healthy to talk about. And we want to help you as an employer and a workplace be your whole self at work and at home. We all have such incredibly stressful lives and so many things going on. You know, we just want to help people be their true and best selves when they come to work. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a lot easier said than done, because you can imagine what that's like if you've got, you know, employer number A saying, we want your whole self at work, as long as we can thrash you 90 hours a week every single week on billable hours. No offence to the lawyers in the room. Or if it's done in a really authentic way, and I think that's a huge difference, is that if the organisation's employees feel as though that message is being delivered in an authentic way, then it seems to me as if people get behind it. If it's delivered in the wrong way, it can be the wrong message.
Yeah. Agree. And we themed our 100% You in sort of 3 areas. It was like do good, see good, and overall feel good. And so we've kind of packaged it up and just made it accessible for people, made it easy for people to be a part of it, to opt in or opt out and participate. And, the generation after the activities and the events of people talking about it. We started off and people kind of came along but were a little nervous to some of the events, and then just the groundswell of chatter afterwards, it starts to gain momentum and people start to see that this is important. But I think it's important to say it's not just the activities and the mentoring, the people coming in. It's authentically how the business operates, and things like you talked about working hours, and we're a global company and we have people on calls at all times of the night and day, and we can't expect them to come into the office for a 9 to 5 when they're on calls at 6 a.m. or midnight or whatever that looks like. So it's also providing them with an environment that's safe and gives them some guardrails around saying you can say no to that and you can come in flexibly, and so there's lots more things to a wellness strategy and a wellness program than simply kind of running a few programs.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So what the research says about this is that mental health is, of course, multi-determined. It's not just that you're saying, okay, I'll put in a wellbeing strategy here and I've got my fruit bowl over here and that's my wellbeing done. It's really driven by things like the way that job is designed, how much resources people have, the balance between organisational justice issues, how you manage disputes. There's lots of different factors that come into it. I think, one of the things that would be really good for you to comment on, Breckon, is that a big part of a determinant for wellbeing and mental health, and I'm just using these words interchangeably at the moment, is reward and recognition. Because if you imagine it like a family, if you've got the parent that's sitting there and saying, zero appreciation, zero care, here's your paycheck, see you later, that's totally different to a family in which the organisation is showing that they recognise the work that's being done. So how do you do that? You kind of launched recognition reward from the start at Unilever and Amex. So how did you go through them?
So my experience in working in this space for the last 20 years really has seen the wellbeing agenda, if we want to call it that, in the workplace evolve from being about bananas and running shoes to then including mental health, to then including financial education, financial literacy, financial wellbeing, to now being much more holistic. And really that's the approach that I've tried to take for many, many years with some of these big employers that I've worked for. And I'll tell you a little story that happened just recently. So last week we had our Deloitte Partners Conference where all of our 1,000 partners come together, talk about the strategy for the business, and we launched our new values. And these are global values, but they're nuanced slightly for Australia so that they resonate. And the team that was putting this together came to me a few weeks ago and said, okay, we're going to have all of these rooms on the day and the partners will come in and we want to teach them about how they're going to live these values. And the room that we want you guys to look after is the take care of each other room, which they were trying to position as our new wellbeing room. And I said to them, okay, that's great, let's do it. And they said, so should we get some fruit and should we get some running shoes and we'll put a treadmill in and we'll get the partners stepping around? And I said, no. What we want to do is focus on our continuous performance enablement strategy. So how do we educate leaders to be great coaches and have performance conversations with people? And one of those conversations, or multiple conversations through the year, should be about flexible working needs, should be about wellbeing needs. Let's talk about mental health, break the taboo, that kind of stuff, and how that relates to performance and productivity. And then let's talk about our recognition strategy. How do we say thank you to each other? How do we appreciate people? How do we sit back and reflect and feel gratitude and feel gracious when we do achieve things in the workplace? And so these are not your stock standard health and well-being or wellness offerings in the workplace. This is thinking much more holistically, much more inclusively about what it actually means to work in a team or in an environment where you've got the best opportunity to be your best self and to ultimately thrive. So, there was no bananas, there was no running shoes, but there was a big emphasis on real-time thank yous and recognition. And there was also a big emphasis on, okay, make sure you're talking to your team members and to each other and your people regularly and helping them to connect the dots so that they feel like they can be the very best version of themselves. And that's not traditional well-being.
No, it's really a changing conversation. So I've noticed as well, like that there's so many companies coming now and trying to understand how you actually execute on this. So I just want to bring it back down to a practical level, and for any of you, feel free to chime in. You know, there's lots of people in the audience here who are businesses that could be less than 50 people. So that means that's one HR person probably,
If they're
maybe
lucky.
a part-time HR person and a consultant. So what does it look like, do you think, for a business of that size to be able to start implementing changes like this?
Joe, I want to pick up on a few things that my colleagues have raised. One is it's keeping it fairly simple. We talked about mental health literacy, Shannon. AOK Day has really encouraged us all to have that conversation, but it's important to note that people don't necessarily know how to ask the question, and they certainly don't know how to deal with the response they might get. So we've got to a point now in terms of our community maturity there, we need to extend the conversation a bit further. And that's where mental health literacy is a really important part of it. So making sure people understand how to deal with the response they might get from an "Are you okay?" type question, helping people be aware of their own self-awareness, and also looking out for observations that people might say they're okay, but they're not really doing okay. So some kind of training for all staff is really, really valuable in terms of mental health literacy. And BlackDog Institute and Beyond Blue and many others are out there running those programs now. SafeWork has recently partnered with BlackDog Institute to provide free training for businesses up to 200 employees. So the micro, small and medium businesses, we have 2 programs currently on offer for all small and medium businesses up to 200 employees, where they can train their managers to learn those skills of how to manage the risks in the workplace. And they can train their workers around self-awareness, mental health literacy, peer support, how to have those conversations in an authentic, meaningful way. I also want to pick up on the comment about strategy and using the intelligence, because I think that's really important too. Training in itself is not a quick fix for something like mental health. You really do need to have a long-term strategy on how you're going to build it into the culture of the organisation. So that Kim mentioned the corporate value of wellness. That's fantastic because it shows that vision and commitment from the leadership right from the top that wellness is important to that organisation. So leadership is really, really critical in any kind of work health and safety strategy, but particularly in mental health. Effective consultation and communication with your workforce. They know what the hazards and risks are in the workforce better than anyone. So talk to them, listen to them. It is an obligation that you consult with your workers, but it needs to be authentic. You look at your intelligence and your data and your analytics and take that conversation beyond you're going to fruit bowls, but look at what the data is telling you in terms of your absenteeism rate, in terms of why people are taking time out of the workforce, in terms of your workflow, the job demands through the organisation. Are there peaks and troughs? How do you manage those peaks and troughs in terms of your resources? So that's when you start to get into the more higher order controls in terms of controlling the risks in mental health. And in terms of guidance and support for small, medium businesses, another partner we've engaged with is Assure Programs, who are providing essentially a free coaching service to help you develop an action plan for your small and medium business. So this is a online or telephone coaching service that's essentially 4 hours over a 12-week period, where a organisational psychologist will work with you to develop an action plan to get you started on that journey of showing leadership commitment, training your workforce, looking at what your hotspots are through a fairly basic staff survey, and then putting in a plan in place to address some of those hotspots. So there's certainly resources out there available for small, medium businesses, available now and free of charge.
And just to give this an extra plug, how much does it cost to get an org psych for 4 hours to develop if you were in market?
I'll probably ask my consultant colleagues.
More than free.
It's certainly not cheap.
Yeah, so there's 2 amazing resources there. I'm just going to come back to this one a couple of times because I think it's really important. We will pop up SafeWork's website later on, and if you go on there, you can get access to both of those programs. These are programs which would normally cost quite a lot of money, and it's a free service. And given the complexity to do absolute best practice, gold standard well-being, these are resources which can get you to that if you don't have the kind of scaffolding around you. Otherwise, I think what we also wanted to do is just to kind of give you some ideas here about how some of these organisations have gone about doing it. Shannon, I might kind of pop over to you as well. I need to also just kind of give Shannon a plug. So Shannon is ex-BlackDog, has done wellbeing consulting via BlackDog. is also ex-Virgin, so has kind of been on the ground delivering and implementing these programs as well, and is now a wellbeing consultant who helps organisations to be able to deliver best practice wellbeing strategy. So what does a wellbeing consultant do? How does it work, and what are you delivering? And
So I guess if you use the word consultant, it seems like it's got money attached to it. Sometimes it does. I think it's really interesting, having come from working at BlackDog Institute for the last few years, I think the loveliest thing about being in this space, and part of why I love it, is because it's a very generous space to be in. So you've got organisations like BlackDog, Heads Up, Beyond Blue, SafeWork. There's lots and lots of free resources out there. Sometimes it can be around navigating those. But actually having come from working at BlackDog in the education team, and where sometimes I guess training is the new sneakers and bananas, and it's really important to be thinking more broadly than that, but education needs to play a really significant role in things that people are doing. So really what we're looking at doing in consulting is looking what organisations are doing already. So, quite often initial conversations I'll have with people, I'll say, well, we're not doing anything. And then when you pull that apart a little bit, they might be, most organisations have an EAP service. They might be doing things more broadly around health and wellbeing. Very commonly in a large organisation, you'll have people doing things. Some of those have come from above. Some of those are organisation-wide. Some of those are because Betty from accounts decided it was a good idea. And so when we're consulting and helping people build strategies, we're looking at what's happening already in an organisation and not reinventing the wheel around that. And then, matching that against what the evidence says around best practice. And so giving consideration to if people have engaged very well with Betty from accounts idea and we're getting a good return on investment for it, and people are going to do Betty's mindfulness session on a Thursday, then it can be around advertising that that's what's happening more broadly across the business. It doesn't have to be around spending a whole lot of money on a whole lot of things. So it's looking at what you've got already. It's potentially looking at some resources that are out there in the market that are free, that are easy for people to access if they know where they are, and communicating what those are. And then there might be some costs involved in terms of education programs, things like that. And then obviously looking at some of the things that we know can negatively impact on people's mental health and well-being. So some people's roles might have some elements of them that aren't great for mental health and well-being. So mitigating some of those risks is really important. And then the big shining absolute thing in any of that is making sure that whatever you're doing is evidence-based. And so regardless of what resources you're using, whether they're free, whether you're paying for them, what SafeWork has and what they will advocate will always have good evidence behind it. So just making sure that whatever you're put in place has really good research, and asking people who are approaching you saying they're doing things in that space, what their evidence is and what research sits below it, means that you'll get a good return for your investment. It means you're spending your resources and your money sensibly.
so how do people tell if something is evidence-based? Because you could say, okay, go and have a look at the research paper behind it, but there's research papers that I look at and I've got a doctorate and I've got no idea what they're talking about. So if you don't have a research background,
I guess in this space, going to sites like the SafeWork site, going to Heads Up. So if you're going to reputable sites and you can trust the research there. I mean, if you go more broadly than SafeWork and BlackDog and Beyond Blue and Heads Up, you're probably going to overwhelm yourselves trying to read research anyway. So they're a really good place to start, is just going to people who you know are the experts and looking at what research they're talking about and informing yourselves that way.
I just also want to say, anyone who's viewing online or anyone who's in the audience, towards the end we're going to do Q&A. If you've got a burning question for anybody up here, on our Facebook page, which is listed up there on the side, you can ask your question and then somebody will bring up the questions towards at the end. I'm happy to read out anything if you've got anything in particular that you want to get answered from these people here. So just wanted to, you guys were both nodding as Shannon was talking there. Was there things that you wanted to kind of add to what she was saying?
I think like a lot of it resonated. I think you've just got to it can be really overwhelming. So just really hone in on what are those data points that are important for your organisation. You know, I always go to have a purpose. What's a purpose? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Because in this space, there are just so many things that you can do. And you'll end up spending a lot of money or a lot of resources, a lot of time, and influencing a lot of people for not a lot of outcome. So, you know, if you are starting out, just keep it really small and refined, and be willing to test and learn. We've learned lots over you know, so far. So get your data points, get your stakeholders on board, really understand what it is that you're actually trying to do. Otherwise, there's really no purpose. So I think, you know, the purpose is really important to define.
I agree 100%. And actually, in the years that I've worked in this space, I've learnt that there is no best practice for a workplace wellbeing program. There's only best fit. So you take the research and certainly scrutinise any provider that's coming to you saying that we've got this silver bullet program that's going to fix your wellbeing problem. Ask for as much evidence as possible to be fully informed before making the decision. But actually, all of the examples from the big companies and the research, it should just serve as inspiration for you to decide what is the best program for your people and your workplace. And I think in many ways, when you've got a smaller organisation, sometimes part of developing that strategy and that focus and knowing where you're going is easier, because it's easier to get employee input to shape that. And it's all very well for people who are in HR or health and safety or reward functions or whatever to sit back and say, okay, we've done our research, we've put together the strategy, this is the problem statement, and now we've got this program that's going to fix it. But if Betty from accounts hasn't given her feedback, and if, you know, if the driver in the forklift truck in the factory hasn't given his input as well, if it's not shaped by as many people as possible for whom this program is supposed to help, then it's never going to have the legs and it's not going to be sustainable. So I think, you know, in our capacity, in my team's capacity, having workforce analytics as part of the responsibility, we're always looking for these data points, these gold mines that we can pull out those insights and say, okay, this is working, this isn't working, let's try something different, let's move slightly, let's bring this into the mix, let's drop that. Because if it's not always being customised and it's not best fit, then it's not going to have the sustainability that you want. And I think, you know, we can talk about the holistic nature of wellbeing. That gets a little bit daunting, because then it means there's a lot more stuff that you can put in the program. So to Kim's point about, you know, focusing the beam, picking the things that are most important and just doing something, starting somewhere, that's probably the best way to think strategically about a workforce wellbeing program.
I was going to say, it sounds like Deloitte and PayPal have done a lot of work over a lot of years searching through the clutter in the mental health space to try and find what is evidence-based and what works and what doesn't work. One of the priorities for us at SafeWork is to try and make that as simple as possible, particularly for small and medium businesses. So we're doing the research and evidence and trying to support that to make sure the programs we get behind are validated. And for those who are eligible, you have that organisational psychologist to help you navigate through what works for you and your business. For those that aren't, then obviously consultants like Shannon and others can assist you in that strategy. And it may only be a one-off session to help you get started, but they've got the expertise that can wade through what is evidence-based intervention and what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that the message I want to keep re-emphasising is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Kim's already done that for you, fortunately. And she, like all of the companies that started doing this 4 or 5 years ago and then figured out, okay, this worked, this didn't work, and then now that's been married up with what researchers who are sitting at universities all around the world have been doing in academic settings, and now we're at this interface of the two where the evidence levels that are good are offered via SafeWork, via Beyond Blue, via BlackDog, and you can just go in there and you can get a bit of a map. Even though I think that it is really important to kind of do that piece which is around making sure the fit is best, there's also kind of a sequence that I see in a lot of organisations when they're going through this, and that sequence is typically, if you're a business that's probably over 50, it seems to be first point of call is manager training, just to make sure that leadership understands the importance of this, and then the second point of call is like a tailored piece that the organisation seems to feel like it's going to work. You guys want to talk a bit about that kind of top-down approach or sequencing that you see?
I think there's almost a step before that as well, which is having the leadership at the very, very top endorse and advocate for even going after this agenda in the first place. And PayPal CEO Dan Schulman, who's ex-American Express, is a fantastic advocate for employee engagement and investing in employees in all different ways. And I refer to those individuals in workplaces as the charismatic megafauna. They're like the panda bears of the workplace, you know, because everybody wants to... You can tell him I think he's a panda. You know, people listen to what he has to say, and if there's an agenda that he's passionate about and he wants to advocate for, people will pay attention. It's like, you know, when you give money to the wildlife fund, it's the panda that gets the money. It's not the shrew that lives in the forest near the panda. But that shrew benefits because he's in the bush with the panda. So if you've got those people at the very, very top who are saying, yep, this is the right thing to do, let's have a value in our organisation which is about this, then that's a good preface for then getting leadership training and then doing broader strategy and so on and so forth.
Further to that point though, sorry, just further to that as well is because we have, you know, BlackDog, we would advocate, you know, if you can put one resource in place, train your managers, just because of the power that they have to affect change and shift culture and support employees. So I'm absolutely with you on the leadership team, senior leaders, executives, boards. It's wonderful. We need to start there. Ideally, that's where we start. But and there needs to be passion from that cohort, but there also needs to be education for that cohort. So if you've got a board or an executive leadership team that are saying that they're passionate and they want to do something, then it's not that passion's not enough. We need to ideally, in the first instance, educate them. Because people get excited about these things and they see a return, and people are understanding that this is really important, which is wonderful, but they're the people who are ultimately going to steer the ship in terms of a strategy and where things move forward. So an excitement or a motivation or a passion is not enough. It's really super, super important if that's where you're starting to have them be educated by experts in that space.
At SafeWork, we've done a lot of work with stakeholders and research to come up with a very simple model that really resonates in all the work health and safety issues, not just mental health. It's our work health and safety landscape that we encourage people to embed in every workplace. The 5 key elements are really leadership at the top, as we've mentioned, communication and consultation with your workforce, which is critical, worker capability, as Shannon just emphasised, the workers need to have the skills and knowledge to have the mental health literacy, to be able to have those conversations, and that includes managers as workers. Systems, policies and procedures. You need to have the traditional safety management system in place to complement the leadership and the workforce and the consultation. And you also need a safe working environment, which in a physical context is quite simple, but in a psychological context that includes your job demands, your workflow management, your environment where people feel safe to come to work and actually talk about the individual challenges they're faced with. In a safe environment where they can actually be heard and action. So that's something we can share around as well, is a very simple landscape model that can be applied in all workplaces.
So I hope this isn't sounding daunting. What I think is helpful to stay motivated about all of this is to recognise what actually happens when it's done really well. So I think part of the reason why we've seen such great changes in the way that diversity is handled in the workplace is because it's gotten to the point now where there's been really good studies around return on investment. So at a board level, if somebody's sitting there with 10 studies that say the money they're going to get back, you can convince a CFO to get out and get it done. I think that data is still up and coming. But the data that's really here already, just from the people sitting in front of us, is like what it's like to be in workplaces where they've been investing into wellbeing for a really long time. And so I just wanted to ask you guys, what's your sense about how you influence your leaders? What are you taking to them? How do you get them on board? And how do you influence those initial wellbeing committees and advocates? How are you getting together the initial stages of change? What did you do to get them going when there's obviously quite a lot of work's involved to get it up and running?
I go back to probably my opening comments about the legal obligation, the moral and ethical obligation, and the fact that it makes good business sense. So depending on what motivates your leader, one of those should tap into it, and then using the evidence to support that. So the commercial drivers from a financial perspective and some of the analytics that Brendan's spoken about earlier. The moral and ethical argument, which is quite a strong argument as well. or, if necessary, the legal argument, which SafeWork can help you out with.
Well, for me, to Breckon's point earlier, I'm lucky enough to work for an organisation that truly values it and lives it and pays attention to it, and has a leader that passionately champions it. So conversations locally went both ways. So we have a Ministry of Culture team as well in our PayPal Australia office, and so it was really easy to go to that team of people and say, you tell me what do you need, how will this be successful for you? Like, what are the kind of things you're looking for? And funnily enough, talking about bananas and sneakers, we have the pool table, we have free food, we have, all the stuff you would expect for a fintech, but, none of that stuff came up as important in this sense. And then for leaderships, they're employees too. So it's kind of talking to them as a person and saying, well, yes, you're a leader, but you're also an employee and you're a person, and you have just as much pressure and stress as everybody else. So your team are going to work as well as you help them to work. So, the influencing is, yes, about the data and, this stuff is important, but also treating people as people and letting them know that this is actually important for people to feel safe to come to work and to want to come to work and have energy to come to work, and for it to be, you spend so much time there, for it to be a space that you want to come to and feel safe to come to.
So there's probably one other for me. I mean, I've been quite spoilt with the companies that I've worked for where that environment of wellbeing has already been there. I've been lucky enough to work for Unilever, which is a big, passionate advocate for environmental sustainability as well as workplace well-being and nutrition and all of these sorts of things. American Express, again, big global multinational, invests heavily in leadership development and well-being and all of these other parts of the employee experience. Lend-Lease as well, another significant investor in the employee experience. And now Deloitte. So I've kind of been quite fortunate in my career, but I think the thing that probably amplifies the conversation about well-being that I've found at that leadership table is if you can, yes, certainly have them experience it for themselves so that they can then become champions and advocates and ask for more for the people that they're responsible for. But also if there's something that the business does, if there's some product or some service or something that's core that you can leverage and you can message in such a way through a well-being agenda or commitment that resonates with that leadership team. It's not always easy. So at Unilever, there was a very big foods division, and some of those foods were positioned as healthy foods. So using that as, let's be authentic. If we're going to be selling this product to our customer, let's also make sure that that's reflected in our workplace. These sorts of things, we talk about providing authentic consulting advice at Deloitte. If we're going to be investing in making an impact in the community or for our clients, we need to be doing the same for our people. So it's really just trying to pick out those little things that resonate with those leaders that help them to connect the dots between investing in their people with providing better customer service or whatever else it might be. That helps to progress that conversation.
Okay, I'm just going to give a couple of questions that have come through from the people online. I'm also going to go back out to the audience. If you guys have got a question, please pop it up online. It makes it a bit easier for me to just run it from here, but I will kind of open it up to you guys in a second. So first question that we've got here is, how do you know when your program is working? How do you measure it? What measures work or don't work? And what are the most cost-effective initiatives that you've found? Anything around measurement or assessment?
Well, the Cheshire Cat said to Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So I think an important thing is to at least have an idea of what the destination is. And whatever that is, that becomes your metric for success. And you can backfill everything else around your strategy and your events and your comms and all the other kind of stuff to help to get to that destination. But it's important to at least have one data point to start with, and then also to remember that well-being is an outcome. It's the output of doing a whole bunch of other things. And it's a hard thing to measure. It's a little bit of a dark art when you start talking about how you're going to measure a change in well-being over time. But there are certainly data points that you can look at, and there are traditional HR ones like absenteeism and presenteeism and turnover and employee engagement. So I think it's just a matter of picking the right ones for you and for your organisation, but at least having one measure of success.
I might just say what not to do. Don't make your measure of success notifications of psychological injury in the workplace, because you do not want to discourage notifying psychological injury in the workplace. So it's really important that your indicators are driving the behaviour you want to encourage and not discourage. So the reason why notification is important is because you can't help someone if you don't know what they're suffering or what they're experiencing. So it's a good thing to encourage notification. It's a good thing to encourage early intervention. What you don't want to see is long-term absences, long-term periods of time where people aren't being supported. So really think carefully about your metrics. We often do see businesses that hold up their notifications and say, look, my notifications are going down, but their claims costs or the duration of the claims are going up. And that tells me there's a culture in that workplace that they're not comfortable to talk about what's going on.
I think it's helpful to think about, if you're building a strategy as well, that all of the different interventions in that strategy, if you build a strategy, it can actually be very simple. It can look like a mathematical equation, really. If you've got different points, say, around leadership, around support, around policies and processes, around training, then it's quite easy to look at building a strategy and then having a 6-month or a 12-month or a 3-year plan around that, and having different points at which you review where you are within that strategy. And I think you can know that, or you can feel confident in the interventions you're putting in place, then if alongside that strategy you're doing things that have evidence behind them. And so if you're going to reputable providers, if you're looking at things like SafeWork or Beyond Blue or Heads Up or Way Ahead, and putting interventions in place that are recommended, then you know those interventions are based on good research, and that takes a little bit of the pressure off you as well in terms of some of that data. And as long as you're measuring your trajectory along that strategy, then that puts you in a pretty good and safe position, I think.
Yeah, I suppose I just also want to check with you, Kim, because my sense of how I hear HR doing this is that often they're just out talking. Their measurement is going out and saying, what did you think of that program?
Yeah.
Did it work? Did it not work? Did you hate it? Like, how did you guys do it at PayPal?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, actually. So I'll go back to my earlier point around purpose and say, like, what is your purpose? And that will drive the metrics that are relevant for you and that you are going to measure against. But it's going out and talking to people. How was that? How are you feeling about that? You told me you needed this particular thing. Has that solved the problem? What else can we do? What else are we looking for? So engagement, feedback, walking the floor, talking to people is actually kind of where you get a lot of feedback and data that people may not put in a survey, or may be hard to capture through a numeric. Yeah.
When you do your engagement surveys, are there particular parts of it that you look really closely at as a way to measure well-being, or is it more about your chats?
Yeah, there are questions we have global engagement surveys, and there are certainly questions around wellness and well-being and the environment and safety. I always like to go to the comments where people can kind of free text and tell us what they really think, and they do. And then just talking to people. And, we run deep dive sessions, feedback sessions. We have open door sessions where people can, pick a leader and go spend half an hour and talk to them. And we get so much rich information just from getting somebody talking about what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, I think there might be something in what you just said, which is kind of like, of the things that you've seen tried at different organisations for all of you, those things where it's like, okay, so I ran a session where we didn't do the fruit bowl, but we really emphasised the message, or, I made a leader available for an hour. Like, what are the things that you guys have seen that have been innovative ways to start to do wellbeing strategy that have worked really well for the organisations either you've been in or that you've heard of?
I would say starting with Uprise, to be honest with you, because I'll take the fee cut. Because as I said, I didn't really know what we needed, and it was a really nice start, and it gained momentum. And from that, I could get a feel for what people were looking for, and the solution worked for us because it was online and people could do it at their own pace in their own time, and it wasn't like an EAP where they didn't feel like information was going somewhere in particular, and like people just really resonated with it. And honestly, sometimes it's the really simple things. You know, you talk about reward and recognition, and it's talking about it. And we have the same thing, a rewards program where people can stand up at our monthly all hands and say, I nominated, you know, what was her name in accounts? I forgot her name already. Betty. I nominated Betty for wellness because she, you know, did X, Y, Z. And so it's just kind of talking about it and normalizing it and getting the groundswell up. But honestly, sometimes it's the really simple things, like just encouraging people to have a conversation or say congratulations to somebody, or it really can just be the simplest things that make the biggest impact.
I think, and this is a little bit on the reverse of that, is the worst thing you can do is make an announcement that you're going to do something around employee mental health and wellbeing and put out a comms around that, particularly if that's coming from your leadership group and then not know what your plan is to back that up. I've seen that happen quite a few times, and it's a little bit disastrous. I think you just lose trust with people, and it can have a really damaging impact on culture. And so if you're going to make a statement about doing something around employee and mental health and wellbeing, having a plan around that, at least to get you through the next sort of few months, is a really good idea, because otherwise people think, oh yeah, there was that announcement and then nothing happened. So that can be really damaging.
Metrics that count the positive behaviours is really important. So if you want people to participate in your manager training or your mental health skills training, then count your participation rates. If you want people to notify so that you can assist people, then count your notifications, but in a positive way, because that's the behaviour you're trying to encourage. What you don't want is people being absent from work for long periods of time without being connected to the workplace, without recovering at work. If you want them to participate in online tools, then count your participation rates, because that's the positive behaviour you're trying to facilitate in the workplace.
And making the time to do that as well. Like, there's no point in running training or having an online program if you're not going to make time for people to do that. So building that into your intervention is, I think, quite powerful. Making those things potentially mandatory is what we would argue for, and then giving people the space and time to do that.
Thank you. I'm just going to open up to the audience if you guys have got any questions for the panel as well. Has anyone got anything that hasn't? I also apologise, I said to you before, put up all of your questions online, because I'll ask, and now I don't have them because I don't have them in front of me. So if you did just recently put one up, thank you. Just fixing it up. Down the bottom. Great. Okay, I have gone through most of these ones. Some of them, I do acknowledge that a couple of you have asked very sensitive questions, which I won't be able to go into on the panel. But just also wanted to check too, is there anything from the audience? Anyone want to have a burning question? Yeah, a couple.
I did send a few questions through to you, but maybe the content was, I don't know. But my question is for Breckon in particular. Companies that maybe have a less flexible working arrangement, what's the uptake regarding the application of some of these health and wellbeing strategies that you're talking about generally in Australia? So, you know, a company that is fairly strictly 9 to 5 or 8 to 6.
Yeah.
Has the banana in the fruit bowl.
Yeah.
What's the feeling out there at the moment in Australia in terms of the uptake of all the other components of this?
Well, when I was in the UK, I lived in the UK for 10 years and did a piece of research with the University of Brighton looking at workplace engagement survey results and drivers of wellbeing, productivity and performance. And the thing that was most statistically significant in correlating to outcomes for wellbeing was a feeling of flexibility. So in a lot of workplaces where that flexibility is more difficult to find, you would think that a wellbeing agenda would be more difficult to introduce. But if you think much more holistically about what wellbeing actually is, if you're restricted to 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, or you work on a forklift every day and that's the only thing that you do, or like at American Express, you've got a lot of people who are in a call centre and they have to be on the phone and they have to, you know, have a certain amount of time, and they've only got 22 minutes a day where they can have their toilet breaks, these sorts of things. you would think that there isn't that same level of flexibility, but actually flexibility means a lot of different things. It doesn't mean for everyone that you only work 9 to 3 or you only work from whatever hour to whatever hour. It can be interpreted differently, and it could just be having the opportunity to talk to your people leader about what you actually need from your work environment or from the way in which you're coached and led or the cohesion of your team. That's the sort of thing that gives that person flexibility. And so if I think about the workplaces I've worked in, some have fantastic flexible work arrangements, but typically there's freedom within the frame, so there are some things that you just can't move, but there's still that level of flexibility within that framework.
My question is for Jim. When it comes to the point that a physical or psychological condition goes to a claim, for instance, what are the strategies around working with workplaces to achieve a sense of empathy with that claim to prevent it from becoming something that can go tail or into a life space?
The early intervention is the golden rule. So the sooner you're aware of someone who's battling for mental ill health, whether it be work or non-work related, the sooner you can engage and intervene and assist that person in their recovery at work. The second thing would be recovering at work and not at home, wherever possible. Not always possible, depending on the nature of the work and the job you do and what is the cause of the mental ill health. But where it is possible, then keeping that person socially connected to the workplace is critical. We all know what it's like coming back to work after a long absence from holidays or rec leave. That first day back at work can be quite daunting. You've got an inbox that's going through the roof. You're overwhelmed with the workload that you've got to take on that first day back. If you're suffering from anxiety or any kind of mental health condition, that is just tenfold, that level of stress and anxiety. So keeping that person engaged in the workforce and assisting that recovery at work is the golden rule.
And
Sorry, I'll have to finish up because we're at the end of the hour. I apologise. Maybe you can just grab Jim after. But I just, first of all, wanted to thank you all for coming. I appreciate you all being here. I hope that there's been a couple of things that you've been able to take with you that have been practical, both for Are You OK Day and then extending it out beyond. Do you want to do one more plug for the SafeWork website so people know where to get information from?
Please encourage everyone to have a look at the resources online, whether you're small, medium or large businesses. Our website is mentalhealthatwork.nsw.gov.au. We are looking for large businesses that are doing a great job in terms of ambassadors, and we're also looking for small and medium businesses willing to participate in our free programs.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. The words mentalhealthatwork.nsw.gov.au.
Can you please join me in thanking our panellists today? And thank you for coming.